Hi everyone, thanks Stuart. Um, I think they're just having thank yous and final wrap-ups in the other main super session, so we might find some others trickling in as we get started. Um,
Sure.
I don't want to sort of delay too much though, because we have got a fairly large schedule. So it is my pleasure to introduce Stuart Mealor, the Managing Director of HRDNZ. Um, Stuart's going to be talking to us today about introduction to MySQL queries, and I think, as he mentioned in the forum post, it's going to be a bit technical, but I think there will be, despite what Stuart thought in the forum, I think there will be lots of people interested in this. So, without further ado, I'll pass over to Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. If you just want to give some feedback, Fred can hear me, but we'd expect that because Fred knows exactly what he's doing. Paula, I know Paula. She knows what she's doing. Is there anyone who doesn't know what they're doing that are still struggling to get the audio, or is everyone's fine? Hopefully people are fine. Cool. Thanks, Stephen. Excellent. Okay, so we've got a few people here. I will stop my webcam after this quick introduction. Obviously, it helps people who are struggling with lower bandwidth and old technology and so on. So I will do that. But it's kind of nice to see. Well, I hope it's nice to see. I hope it's nice to see the presenter, first of all. So, as Teresa said, we've actually got a few people just joining. I can see the list getting a little bit bigger. No, I probably won't leave it on. Thanks, Fred. You know, I'm well known for being very shy, so I'd probably turn it off in a moment anyway. So it's great to see people. If you could just let us know in the chat where you are, or perhaps, yeah, let us know where you are, first of all. I know Paula's over in the US. I know Teresa's here in New Zealand. Yeah, a few people that I recognised as European names, so that's nice. It's probably already getting quite late over there now. Australia, Hong Kong. Hello, Andrew. Okay, quite a few people in the US. I guess that's because of the time zones. So we repeat these sessions, or a lot of these sessions, of course, twice, so that you don't have to be up in the middle of the night to do this. So the next thing I'd like to know before we even start, obviously this session has been defined as an introduction to quite a technical area, which is MySQL reporting, or the basics of MySQL reporting in Moodle specifically. So if you can give some feedback about whether you have actually done anything with MySQL reporting before, or whether this would be a new area to you, or indeed you may be an expert, and you may be a database administrator who's going to find this incredibly simple. So it's good to have a couple of people with no experience. That's fine. New area. That's great. This session is an introduction, and although it is technical, we're going to make it as non-technical as possible, or as clear as possible. Some experience. Okay, expert in MySQL. That's cool. Bit of limited. Narissa, limited experience in Moodle. Okay, so we've got a variety, and that could be quite useful as we towards the end, if we've got questions and things like that. Okay, someone's using configurable reports. That's definitely something that we'll touch on later. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just take my video off. You've all seen me now. You know how messy my office is. So that's enough. We don't need to. Yeah, ad hoc on some knowledge. Okay, so I think we've got more or less the audience we expected here. let me just take my camera off. Okay, so I've taken my camera off. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. I'm sure that someone will say they can't if we lose that audio. Hi Randy, nice to see you. Okay, so here we are in the iMoot, the second session. First one was pretty good, quite a lot of people there, lots of interaction. This is, as I've said, a semi-technical presentation, and I have resisted the idea of actually screen sharing anything here. I've seen that happen before, and sometimes it can work okay. Other times it's pretty tricky, and certainly for some of the things that we're going to look at in this session, I think it would probably be a bit ambitious to try and no, I'm all right, thanks, Fred. I've got everything in screenshots anyway, and it's probably a little bit easier for me to manage as well. This isn't something that I teach regularly. In fact, it is, because we run a course in MySQL reporting in Moodle, but we only run it twice a year. It can get a little bit intense, so I'm not a MySQL database expert. I've been self-taught over many years, and hi Tim, and it's a case of explaining and sharing what I've actually done with Moodle, very specifically with Moodle itself. So just as a way of quick introduction, that's actually the wrong one. Let me just say, yeah, okay. So HRDNZ, this is our company. We are a Moodle partner based in New Zealand, and this is some of some of the leading people within our team. And of course, lots of these names you will instantly recognise, because a lot of these are people who are involved in Moodle in lots of different ways. Teresa, of course, who is my moderator for this session, so she's already said that she's going to kick me out if I misbehave, which I don't doubt that she would do that. Teresa, of course, is a PHM, a particularly helpful Moodler, holds the MCCC, and is an ambassador for the iMoot, which is great. People like Anna, who is well known for her work with MCCC worldwide, and she's a PHM as well. Mary L, also known in the Spanish community really well. Jean-Marc, Paula, and myself at the bottom there. So we have a team that you may well recognise these people from Moodle.org forums, from Moodle Moots, from the iMoot, and so on. So we're very heavily involved with Moodle in all ways, shapes, and forms, really. So what we're going to look at in this session is basically this kind of structure, the basics, MySQL, the command line interface, which for some people can be very scary. The main type of queries we're going to look at are the select queries, which is the command within MySQL that allows us to actually select data. We'll look at some plugins that are available for Moodle, including one that Tim, who's with us today, developed. I'll also mention MySQL Workbench, and towards the end I'll also mention the courses that we run for MySQL reporting in Moodle. That might be something that you'd want to think about for your own development after this presentation. Although the idea of this presentation is really to just show you that this possibly isn't quite as scary an area as you may think, and that you can learn an awful lot on your own, or by looking through the forums, or looking through Moodle docs, or just looking through basic MySQL tutorials. So there's lots of different ways to learn this stuff, but I will just mention our courses so you know about those, because I think they're actually the only courses online that are specifically for reporting within Moodle. So If you do have questions as we're going, feel free to put them into the chat area. I have got that on the screen there. I can see that on the side. So if I can answer as we're going, I will. If I see a question and think, maybe we'll leave that to the end, I'll say that. And it's also obviously useful to just hear your comments in that chat as we're going. So the first thing I would say is that if you want to learn MySQL queries with a Moodle, you must have a test site. Don't ever try to learn this stuff on your real live site, whether that be your school or your company or your university. This is something that when you're using MySQL directly with your database, you can break it. You can break it quite easily. You can change data you never intended to change. You can slow the whole thing down by writing a query that doesn't resolve it properly. So this is something that what could possibly go wrong? Everything could go wrong, actually. So you must have a test site, and that can be, a separate site on your main server, which is hidden away and it's just for you to use. You can use, a local installation on your own computer, and so on. Yeah, select queries, and we are going to stick with select queries today. Select queries don't often break things because all you're really doing is showing data, extracting data and displaying it from the database. Obviously with updates and deletions, then you are definitely going to run into issues if you get things wrong. But one thing that can happen, even with a basic select query, if it's written really badly, it can actually slow your server down while it tries to process that query. So, we do need to be aware of that. Even I don't generally run a new query on a live site. I'll always test it on a test site first to make sure it's going to do what I think it's going to do, and then maybe import that across to a live site. So, as I mentioned, we can set up a test site in a number of ways. A local site, if you're an administrator, create a second site, or in fact, you might be able to create an entire duplicate of your main site, the database, and then work with that. And that's really nice if you can do that, because obviously you're dealing with the real data, and that's going to help with your own learning curve and understanding the results and so on. If you're not a Moodle administrator, you can create a local site yourself. It's pretty easy. There are a number of ways to do that if you want a test site. If you're on Windows, there's some documentation available on the docs.moodle.org site, which will walk you through that. I don't tend to use Windows at all these days. So I will run a local test site, for example, on an Apple Mac. That will struggle a bit on a slow, little MacBook Air, but on a more powerful Mac, it's absolutely brilliant. And you can also, if you're using Linux, there's a step-by-step guide to installing Moodle, which you can do locally. I guess if you are a Linux user, you probably know how to do that anyway. It's probably the type of thing that you're doing day to day. I will say that if you are installing a local test site on your own computer, maybe a laptop, then you may struggle for speed. Laptops are not servers. They're set up in a very different way. But for the sort of thing that we're going to do in terms of learning MySQL reporting, then you'll probably get away with a laptop, to be honest. So one of the things that we want to do when we start learning MySQL is use what's termed a terminal or a console or a shell. Now, excuse me, for purists, these three terms, terminals, consoles, and shells, they mean slightly different things. But if you start looking around on the internet and searching in your favorite search engine for, basic MySQL tutorials, you will actually find that people use these terms very interchangeably. And basically what we mean is that we're using a text interface. So if you're a Windows user, you're probably familiar with the little terminal command that you can just bring up, and it looks like the old MS-DOS kind of interface. You know, that's a terminal or a console where we can actually enter text, and essentially the command line interface, or CLI, it's usually abbreviated just to CLI, is not a graphic user interface. It's a simple text interface. And although it does seem a little bit scary at first, you know, it's just text and code, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, you know, I'm gonna become a programmer by accident here. It is actually really good. It is actually really good to learn some of the basics in the command line, because it's so direct, it's so black and white. No pun intended, because most terminals are black and white. It's really pure and it's really straightforward, and you're right or you're wrong, and it kind of takes out that part of the equation about is the Windows interface doing what I expect, you know. So I like that command line insanity, the definition from Teresa. As I said, it can look a little bit scary at first, but it's really not. It's actually really nice. It's if you're logical and you appreciate black and white, it works fantastically. So, if you do want to look at a good command line interface for Windows, you've got a couple. You've got the default one, which I know Tim Hunt is a huge fan of. I'm just saying that because he's actually said he thinks it's awful. You could use Putty, which I believe uses Xterm. And I noticed that Console 2, yeah, as Tim said there, Console 2 is very popular on Windows. So, I mean, you get away with any of these, to be quite honest. And certainly for basic use, you know, they're all going to be fine. If you're a Mac user, I use Mac a lot myself. You've got the terminal, the default terminal, which is actually, you know, fine. And you've got Xterm, which is the X window standard as well. And I'll include the Linux users, although I'm sure anyone using Linux, you know exactly what you're doing already. There are loads of options for Linux because it comes from a more kind of technical, servery kind of perspective. So you've got the default terminal for GNOME and the default terminal for KDE, and also a nice little, very lightweight one for XFCE, which is very lightweight and, you know, hardly takes any memory at all if you're struggling for memory. So you've got lots of choices, but in terms of what we're going to be looking at now, any of those would be absolutely fine. So on Windows, if we wanted to look at MySQL, we'll probably use something like XAMPP if we've installed that. You remember earlier there's some Moodle docs which can help you install a local copy, and XAMPP for Windows is a very popular way to do that. It gives you this nice little web-based interface so that you can see that your website, that your web server's working. You can also see that your database is working and so on. Pretty easy to start it up. If you're using Mac, you might need to add MySQL into your path. This is a bit technical. It's not always available in your path to begin with, so there's actually a guide there that I often just go back to if I forget what I'm doing, that actually helps you put that command in your normal path, your normal user path. So obviously I don't expect you to do that right now, but that link is there, and so after this session, if you wanted to investigate that, you can just go and look at that site. It's really good. And again, if you're a Linux user, I'm sure that you probably know exactly how to connect to MySQL, but basically you're just issuing the command at the command prompt to start MySQL as a certain user, and obviously localhost means that we're connecting to the server locally. So after you've actually installed your test environment, and actually after you've connected to MySQL, it doesn't really matter whether you're using Windows, Mac or Linux, and it doesn't really matter too much which terminal or console you're using. Pretty much everything else now is more or less the same. So it really isn't going to matter which environment you're in and which options you've chosen so far. Everything, once we're in the command line, is pretty much the same because we're just issuing commands to the MySQL server. So, for example, to exit MySQL, you can just type quit, and if you didn't want to type quit, I think you can also type exit. So then we've just learned, for those people who have never used MySQL before via the command line, instantly we know that we can get out of there just by typing quit or exit. And that's the kind of level that we deal with the command line. We're just having to perhaps learn a number of commands, a number of options for those commands. We need to make sure that we know how to enter a command, you know, whether there's a space, whether there isn't a space, whether things can be in inverted brackets or commas, or, you know, we just need to learn the formats basically and the commands. So that's a typical command line interface screenshot. That's just one of my little local servers running on Ubuntu, which is a Linux distribution similar to Debian. So let's start with some of the basics. If you have a number of databases on your MySQL server, you can actually see them all within the command line here just by using show databases. You can also show tables within a database. So you can just use these. Notice that there's a semicolon on the end of that command, show databases, and also in the screenshot, show tables. The semicolon is essentially the part of the character that tells the server this is the end of my command. So a bit like when you press enter in a word processing program to say this is the end of the paragraph. In MySQL, within the command line, we just use the semicolon to indicate that's the end of the command, and for the server to actually then process that command. So you can't miss that off. If you do, you'll just get errors. It's a sort of little habit that you'll get into when you've written a command. Put that at the end, press enter, and the MySQL server will run off and do what you've told it. So there's our first command, which is show databases. When you first install MySQL, you'll probably find there are a couple of databases in there. There's like a little test database and a MySQL one, and then obviously if you create your own database, you'll see yours as well. And then in this screenshot, I've actually gone into a particular database so that I can then say show tables, and I'm showing the tables within this little database. And my little database is called LMSDB, Learning Management System Database, of course, just for the purposes of this demonstration. So when I type that in, show tables, semicolon, press enter, we then see a very simple readout, a very simple display of the tables in my database, and that's telling me that right now I've got one table and it's called LMS user. Notice there are no spaces in the table names. Moodle will use underscores instead of spaces where necessary. Every database designer and every project have their own standards for the way we do things. With Moodle, we don't have spaces, and we have an underline for a space to make it more readable. I can also see at the end of that query that it's telling me that the query returned one row and it took no seconds. So we got one row of data because we've only got one table, and it took no seconds because it was fast. Obviously, as you start to run bigger queries, you'll get 100 rows or 1,000 rows or 10,000 rows, and you'll obviously see the amount of time it's taking for these queries to run as well. I mean, that's just good information to have. You know, if you write a query that's going to take 5,000 seconds, that is potentially going to impact on your server, potentially. And then, of course, right at the bottom, it just returns us to the MySQL prompt, just ready for our next command. Okay. So, everyone happy with that so far? Do we have smiley faces on here? I don't think we do we? We have, I'm sure people can just give a thumbs up or a little, there you go, the old-fashioned smiley face. Nothing wrong with that. Cool. Okay. So, we know how to show databases and we know how to show tables within databases. We can also use, if we want a bit more information than that, we don't just want to see the database, we want to see what's actually going on in here, or we don't want to see the table, we want to see what's going on in here. We use the describe command, which displays the metadata. It displays the information about that table. So here I've just issued describe and then a space and then the table name, finishing off with the semicolon. And in the screenshot, we can see that as describe space LMS_user, which is the table name, and the colon on the end. And then we get this nice little sort of purist view of our table, showing the different fields, username and first name and last name, the types of data in those fields. And of course, this is actually really important, because if you don't know the type of data that is in a field, then you won't be able to search for it. You won't be able to query effectively for it if you don't understand the type of data in a table. So that's kind of an important little column. We then have a null column, which is just basically giving us some feedback on whether values in this field can be null, can be zero, can be empty. In fact, null is a very specific thing in database terms, but we'll just for now think of it as being empty. So in this case, our table, if we entered a user into this database, we would definitely have to have a username. We definitely have to have a first name. But interestingly, in this, I could have an email that is allowed to be null. So in this example here, you would be allowed to not enter a username. Yeah, thanks. The default, yeah, that's a good point, Anne and Mandy, thanks. In Moodle, our default for table names is actually MDL_ for Moodle, obviously. Most people, I've very rarely seen that changed. I guess if you were hosting a lot of Moodle sites and you really wanted the table names to be to identify quite differently the different sites, then you could do that. And there, we can see 7 rows again in 0 seconds, because it's a tiny little query on a pretty powerful computer. So, as well as describe, so yeah, basically just to remind us, so all we've done really so far is we've mentioned that we can show databases and tables, and that we can also describe them to look at actually what's really in there, what is this table comprised of. So I'm going to introduce the select query, and this probably is the query that you would use 99% of the time that you're working with Moodle and MySQL queries, unless you're a database administrator and you're doing some really clever stuff in the background. And the select query, it's select. I mean, it says what it does. It's very basic, but it's also incredibly powerful. And the basic usage of this command is select some options that you may have, which you would almost certainly need, select something from this particular table, semicolon. You know, it's a very easy syntax to actually remember. So if I, for example, if I issued the command to select star from LMS user, what we see there, so first of all, notice in the screenshot that I've actually changed the database I'm using, and I've changed it by using the use command. So remember that we said even when you first install MySQL, you'll find a number of databases in there, a little test one, and you know, any that you've created. If you see your Inducia, okay, go and run for the train. If you have a number of databases, although you can show them, if you want to actually work with one, you do have to change to it, and you do that by using the use command. So here I'm now using the LMS database on that first line, and it helpfully tells me that the database has changed, which is great. So my next command at the MySQL prompt is then select star from LMS user semicolon. And of course, if you've done any type of querying before or searching, you'll know that the star or the asterisk is used to mean everything. So I'm effectively just saying select everything from the LMS user table. And of course, it's showing me the data. The describe command was showing me the format and what's going on in the background of that table. But as soon as I say select, I'm actually going to see the data. So select everything from LMS user, and there I can see I've got a couple of users, Just in Time and Amanda Hugginkiss. And I think I got these names from an episode of The Simpsons, to be quite honest. We can also see the users' email addresses. We can see whether there is an email stop and their country and their language. Countries are here all abbreviated to 2 characters, and language is abbreviated to 2 characters, which is what you'll find in the real Moodle database. So although we have created a small learning management system database here, what we're actually doing is using the same types of fields and data and information as the real Moodle database. Email stop is about a value that could be used to say, are emails enabled to this person, or are we stopping emails to this person? So that would just be a switch. And if you imagine within Moodle, when you're looking at a user's profile, you know, you could do something like suspend emails to this user, and you select a drop down that says yes or no. And what's happening in the background, of course, is the database is just taking a value that's 0 or 1 for no or yes. Just looking at Anne's comment there, jumping ahead, usually this would show a lot more records, a lot more columns, making it not very usable. Yeah, I mean, sometimes if you're using, say, a copy of your real Moodle database to do this, you will find a lot of information there. Obviously, you could have thousands of rows and you could have dozens of columns, but we'll actually look at how to handle that as well, if that was the case. So if I ask a quick question to see who's actually awake, which of these statements would actually show me everything from a specific table? You should be able to figure that. I was going to put this a bit later, like leave a couple of gaps. Yeah, okay. It's obviously B. Thank you. But it is actually quite easy when you're sort of first learning to get your words mixed up, you know, or to get your little commands mixed up. So, you know, I might think, oh, it's select all from this table, but it's not. You have to use the star. And of course, the reason that B is correct and C isn't is the semicolon at the end. So well done. Everyone's wide awake. So we'll have a look at the so when we did select all from LMS user, it gives us those 2 records. But as Anna said, what if there were 20,000 users and you only wanted to view the first few, or so how do we control and not see everything at once? So sort of overbearing. Well, what we can do is use a limit within that query. So the only thing that I've really changed here is I've said select everything from the LMS user table, but limit it to the first 10. And it's, it's that easy. So, excuse me, if you were just querying at this stage to sort of see the data that you're dealing with and understand what's in there and maybe think about developing a more complex query, you probably don't need to see 10,000 rows. You can just say, okay, let's limit this to the first 10 results. It's still going to show me the format, the structure, and some sample data, and I'm 100% happy now that I'm working with the right table, for example, or that I'm checking that the country is correctly entered and so on. So yeah, limit command, really good. And I mean, when I'm developing queries, I tend to automatically put a limit of 10 on, so I'm not having to wait and not having to, choke my own server getting lots of data back. So pretty straightforward, nice little command. If we wanted to look within our data set, not necessarily at the first 10, then I can just alter that slightly and say let's select everything from the LMS user table and limit it, but starting at 15, going up to 10,000. There's obviously not 10,000 records in here, there is 22, but we're starting at a certain point. So that might be handy if you've got, for example, everyone, or you've got ID numbers and you wanted to go from ID 10,000 because that IDs starting at 10,000 are users that have been created since a certain date. So maybe this year. So that would be a simple way to use that type of command to limit the results, but starting at a certain point rather than at the top. Everyone okay so far? No one's got headaches. No one's run away. So we've basically so far we've used the select statement, and we've looked at all the columns, all the fields are actually called columns in MySQL, even though lots of people call them fields. And it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. If you're happy with what you call it, that's great. But we were looking at all those columns, and what if we just wanted to look at the usernames? So instead of having every single column here in our database returned, in our query, I just want to see the names. So in that case, what we can do is say select username, because username is the column name for the column with our users in. So instead of saying select all, select star from, we just say select username from. So logically, I mean, you're already, if you've never seen any of this stuff before, you'll already be a step ahead of me by now, because you'll realize that you can actually select username and country and language and just have those 3 columns displayed in your results rather than all of them. So, even at this stage, if you've never been exposed to this before, if you're managing to follow along with these fairly straightforward commands, you can start to see how you are just going to be combining little concepts and little phrases to create more and more complex queries. So, and that's good. That's the way we should be doing it. So, for those people who were already thinking ahead, about how you might start. Yeah, that's very true, Marion. This is incredibly addictive once you start it, because it's kind of like a crossword or a Sudoku. You start to want to be able to home in and write something that gives you just what you want, and it's kind of quite challenging if you like that sort of thing. So yeah, as I said, people who are thinking ahead, you're already thinking, oh yeah, okay, I can select just the first name and the last name columns from that, and just pick out the first 5. So that's really cool, just by combining these simple things together. And you may or may not realize this, but it doesn't actually matter which order you display those in. So that although our database is actually structured with username, first name, and last name, we can actually select the data and display that data in different orders. So in this case, I'm actually putting the last name column before the first name column. And yeah, there's a couple of people saying here that it's really good to have this level of control, and then be able to just report on that, to a manager or whatever. It enables you to structure and to find your results in the way you'd like them. And absolutely, as Shane says, when you nail your perfect query that's taken you half an hour, it's a really nice feeling. Some people just love this, and I must admit, I'm one of them. So as well as username, you might just want to pick out country and language and first name. Anything you want, any of the data that's there, you can select it by column in whichever order you want from that table, and limit the results in whichever way you want. Now, of course, all those results that we've been looking at so far have just been listed in the order of ID, which is the order that the records were actually created within the database. So that would be the order, the user ID order in Moodle. Every user, we all have an ID on the sites that we're on, and the first field in our table there is the user ID. So when we get the results, it's going to come back in that order. So just flicking back, we haven't got any real order in this result set. We've just got it coming back in the order it actually was in the database. But we might want to, in fact, I would suggest almost always want to order our data results in some way. So what we can do is actually the order ID column. Okay. So what I'm going to do, let me skip over that one, is add an order column. And here I'm selecting everyone. I'm selecting everything from the course order, and I'm ordering it by full name. So the full name is, so we've moved on here. We're not looking at users. We're actually looking at courses now. So it's a different table, but same theory and like a trimmed down version of Moodle, if you like. So now we're looking at a table with course information in, the ID, the category, the full name, the short name, whether the course is actually visible or not, which again would be a switch, a 1 or a 0, and the language, and a couple of different languages in there. This query is ordering by, so order by full name, which means that instead of it coming back in the ID order, which would probably put introduction to Italian first, because that's ID 3, it actually sorts the whole table out by full name. And I know that you guys will do this sort of stuff with Excel, all the time, and you click on an email. Within an email, you might click on a heading to sort things out by date order and so on. When we do with MySQL, we're just using this order by command and then telling it which field, which column we're actually ordering it by, in this case full name. So again, pretty straightforward. And of course, You could do the same thing with numeric values. That's obvious. If you wanted reverse order, because by default, notice that it was just order. I didn't say order ascending or order descending. The default order, if you don't specify anything, is always ascending. But I can alter that order and have it the other way around just by adding the des, which is descending. It's the abbreviation for descending. So this time I've done it by full name of course, and we're going WPMLIIHC. So that's in reverse order. Okay. We can do, when we do that, I might have this situation where I've selected the language column and the full name column. So that's the language of the course and the course name, language and full name from the table, and I've ordered by language. Now that has given me correctly English language courses before French language courses, but within the English language group of 6 courses, my courses themselves are not in alphabetical order. So what I'd probably like is to have Classic MG at the top. Anyone else hear me okay? I can hear okay. Okay, sorry Paula, I think, okay, cool. So within this data set, my English language courses, I'd probably like those sorted out by full name within there, you know. Would make sense, wouldn't it? So again, not getting too complicated, but this time we're selecting the language and full name columns from that table, and order by the language column, and then, you know, simply comma full name. So we're ordering it by language first, which puts English before French, and then by full name, so that the full name of the courses are now in alphabetical order within their language category. Hopefully that makes perfect sense. And this is the sort of thing that people do in Excel and spreadsheets all the time, isn't it? But it's kind of nice to be able to do it directly within Moodle, you know, with simple commands. So okay, let's see who's awake. Shall I do this to you? Oh, this is too easy. Which of the following would actually show the first name and country of all users sorted by the country and then by the name? Oh, let's see if you can get this. You got to think about that one. That's so mean of me, making people think. I tell you what, I'm gonna carry on, and you can actually come back to that and look at that later. Let's go. Okay, so we might want to count things as well in a database. So maybe we want to count, you know, the number of courses or count the number of users. The count command is pretty straightforward. I use select, count, and then in brackets the all symbol from LMS users. So if I count everything from LMS users, I get 22. If I count everything from courses, I get 8, because I've got 8 courses. If I count all the entries from categories, I get 6, because I got 6 categories. So pretty easy to count. And excuse me, frog in my throat. That counting it can be a little bit misleading, because you have to actually think about what you're counting and what you're not counting. So, for example, are you counting unique values, or are you counting every value? Are you counting rows with zeros, for example? So counting is actually a little bit more complex than just saying count. we need to think about the different types of counting that we might need to do. But on a basic level, I can do things like, say, select country and count the number of users grouped by their country. So here what we've done is just the count has automatically added this extra column to display the result because it's part of the query. And what we've done is we've selected the country column, we've counted the number of users from each group. So we've grouped Australia, and we've grouped Canada, and we've grouped the UK, and then we've counted the number of records matching that item. And then we get this nice count of, well, there must be 4 people from the US, there's 9 people from the UK, there's 3 from New Zealand. Pretty straightforward query, not too complex, just introducing that grouping by functionality. A little bit more complex, a little bit longer, that's really all it is. It's still pretty basic, it's just it looks longer. In this example, we can select the country and the language, so we're selecting 2 columns, and we're counting everything, grouped by country, and then language, ordered by country. So all I'm doing is combining those things. So instead of having these kind of random results, I've now actually got the whole thing ordered by the country that people are in. And you can kind of see as we're building these, you can relate it to your Moodle data quite directly, that you might want to count the number of users in a specific country, or the number of users in a category that are not using English as their first language, or the course isn't set in that language rather. So that kind of data isn't always immediately obvious within Moodle, but if you can develop a simple little MySQL command to do that, that's pretty handy. We can also select distinct values. Earlier on we were counting 3 New Zealand and 9 UK. If we want to select distinct values, then we use the distinct command, which will kind of just say, well, you've only got 3 languages, you've got lots of rows with those 3 languages in, but you actually only have 3 languages. Straightforward. One of my favorite and one of the powerful things about MySQL is that we can use a where option. And this essentially allows us to filter the results. So again, a query that you would be able to read quite happily by now. We're selecting everything from the LMS course table, but now we're saying where the language equals French. And straight away, instead of giving us 100 rows or 1,000 rows, it is filtering. It's looking for where our language column has French as the language, obviously using the FR. And we put that in inverted commas because it's text rather than numeric value. And we can use this kind of where command in lots of really interesting ways. We can say select everything from that course where the category is not equal to 1. So here I'm writing a query which shows me all the courses that aren't in category 1, which is pretty neat, and all we're doing is using that exclamation mark to indicate that it's a not, that's excluding type query. Okay, I'm gonna shift around a bit now because it's coming near the end of our time. So I'm going to shift through a little bit. Bear in mind that you can go and look at this. There is actually more information in here about how to use these queries. But I do want to mention before we finish, some of the plugins and other options that we can potentially use. And I didn't note the number of the tasks. Okay, so you can go back. There's a few more slides there which give you a bit more, a few more commands to play with to get you started. What I will say is that there are a number of useful plugins from Moodle to help you with these types of queries. There are three that I would bring your attention to. Moodle Adminer, the Configurable Reports plugin, and the Adhoc Database Queries plugin by Tim, who I think is still with us. Moodle Adminer is actually very similar to PHP MyAdmin, if you've used that before, but it's a much better solution for using within Moodle. You can see that when you install it as a plugin, it actually shows up in your server menu, and it simply allows you to do the same things that PHP MyAdmin would have done for you previously. If you haven't used that, don't worry too much about it. But what it does is very simple things, like it allows you to export and import databases really easily. So if you wanted to take a copy of your database, put it on a different server, and then start to learn how to query it, this is quite a good way, quite a good low-tech way to do it if you're not a highly experienced admin, and that frightens you a little bit. The Adhoc Database Query, which is developed by Tim, again, it's a standard Moodle plugin. It's really reliable, obviously, and well maintained, and it will appear in your reports area in there. That's actually really good if you want to develop your queries in the basic way that we've done with the command line interface there, and you can actually just copy and paste those commands straight into the custom MySQL query report, and it's really good, really nice, really fast, and it gives you the ability to run commands on a scheduled basis. So you might write a query that you want to see the results of each week or each month, and you can actually set that up to run, on a set date. And you'll see here that although we're in Moodle and we've got the little editor, when it comes to writing the SQL query, we are just issuing one of those simple select queries. We're selecting a number of columns from a table, where filtering out between certain user IDs. So it's exactly the same theory, but of course you can then save it in here. You can save it in here, and you can run that query again in the future, or adapt it, or copy it and learn from it. Really good, really like that. And you can also actually allow different people on your system to view the results. So if you have a query that looks at the number of new courses in the last month, you could write that query, and you could actually make that query available to a normal user on your site, a teacher or a manager. So that's pretty cool. The other one that's worth mentioning is Configurable Reports, which is developed by Juan over in Spain, who I met, and such a nice guy, and really, really wants to make this, one of the best plugins for Moodle ever. It's very simple. It allows you to develop courses, again, using a simple MySQL statement, but what it can do is show you things like graphs of that information, which is really cute, because you can then just drop that into your, your monthly report to management or whatever. And you'll see that across the top, we've got all these tabs for creating filters and templates and so on, and different types of graphs. If you haven't ever seen this, and this is an area that you're interested in, I would definitely recommend you go and have a look at this. You can instantly do kind of drop down reports just by selecting categories and values, or courses, or as we've said, the MySQL report. And any MySQL that you develop on the command line can also go into Tim's Adhoc database query, and can also come into this configurable reports. So you've actually got kind of three different areas that you can develop in, and that's why it's good to learn the basics of the MySQL commands rather than just trying to learn a kind of GUI interface, because it's not, your skills are going to be far more kind of transferable in this situation. I will mention MySQL Workbench. This is absolutely one of my favorite tools in terms of dealing with Moodle databases. It's completely free. It's from MySQL. It's multi-platform, so you can use it on Windows, or Mac, or Linux. It's absolutely fine. And what it does is effectively just connect your database to your database in a nice front end way. I'm just going to go through those two. They're just sort of background stuff. But here we can see one of the things it's doing is showing me graphically how my database fits together. So I could get a visual impression of the Moodle database and perhaps be dealing with courses and users and categories, and actually then that's going to help me understand where the data is for the queries that I want to write and for the results I want to get. And you can, if I take, for example, the glossary within Moodle, I can use MySQL Workbench to show me, in this case, the Moodle 24 Moodle glossary, the glossary view, the glossary data. I can bring those tables together and visualize them and the data in them. And when I want to write a query based on that data, it's so much easier if I can actually see it all there, because like most of us, I'm not in there every single day. I don't remember every command and every column name and so on. But again, here, we've got an SQL view. So we can just take our MySQL queries that we've developed very simply. We can bring them into here, and then we can go further. We can copy them. We can change them slightly. Of course, it's really nice to have them colored so that we can see that we're getting our syntax right and structures right. Really, really cool application. MySQL Workbench, we've got to, if this is something you're fascinated in or you need to do, that's definitely something that you want to look at. I will just mention our MySQL reporting in Moodle course. There's a link to it there. It's one of the courses on our Moodle Bytes site. Well worth doing if you want to know a bit more, And we kind of take you through all the stuff that we've done there in that hour, and obviously really build up your knowledge of how to do this stuff in Moodle. Some important things to be aware of. Well, it's finished. Moodle 2.7 is introducing a new events logging system. I'm sure many of you have heard about that and maybe have started reading about that. And in fact, the Moodle log table, which is one of the tables that we often query when we're writing SQL queries in Moodle, because there's a lot of logging information in there that's really useful. Did a student click on this particular resource? We want to get that information. But from Moodle 2.7, with the new logging system, the Moodle log table is actually going to be a legacy option, and it shouldn't be used because it's going to be slower. So this is something that we need to plan for. One of the cool things is that logs can actually be external to Moodle. I'm not going to say anything more about that, but that might tweak the interest of a few people. But what it does mean is that any queries we've written so far for Moodle, if they use the Moodle log table from 2.7 onwards, that's probably not going to be there. So we will need to update queries that we've got currently. And if we just take a look at the difference, this is the kind of the standard Moodle log table that we've dealt with for many years, really. Now, the time something was done, the user that did it, the action, that old Moodle log is basically being replaced with the new standard log, standard from 2.7 forward. And you can see that it's logging a lot more information. So although it means we're going to have to rewrite some of the queries that we use, it's going to mean that the queries that we can write will be even more flexible. even more sophisticated. So, but it's a change that we do need to be aware of. So just to finish off, to let you know that we do run a course on MySQL reporting in Moodle. We only run it twice a year because it is a little bit intensive, and I do this, so that's both a positive and a negative. I do this myself. I facilitate this course. We only run it twice a year, starting 1st of April, 1st of October. We are revising it at the moment, so we're not sure whether the October course will cover in detail the changes in 2.7 in terms of the database. It probably will. You do get a partner certificate and a badge on completion, and you can look at the details and register on moodlebytes.com for that course anytime you want. And we obviously, really flesh out what I've skipped over in almost no time there. I mean, we haven't even talked about things like how do you limit a query based on time? What if I want to look at the result set from the last week, and understanding time and in MySQL is a little bit awkward. Okay, so that pretty much finishes it. We have lots of participants from all around the world on that course. So if you want to join us for October or next year, that's great. We have people from all over the world, really interesting, good mix of levels of experience and approaches, and you can join us in that if you want to. So that's the end of the presentation. Almost on time. I might just switch my webcam back on. I think I can. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Stuart. The next session does start in sort of 25 odd minutes, so there's plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Thanks, Kay. Thanks.
So you can put your questions in the text chat, or just let us know if you want your microphone unmuted.
I think everyone's worn out. Thanks, Paula. Good. I mean, the idea was to inspire people to find it not too frightening and to maybe have a go. So that's good. That's the aim. Oh, hi, Kim. Didn't see you there. Thanks. Yes, Adminer is a plugin which you can get from the Moodle database, Sarah. Yeah, just look for Adminer. It's in there. Is there a web page with some standard helpful Moodle MySQL queries? Yes, there is, David. Now you can either just go to Moodle Docs and search for MySQL queries, and you'll also find, if you look at the Adhoc database queries plugin, there's also a link to that, and there's a whole group of. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Randy. I knew Randy would know that. I should have just said, Randy, what's the link? Yeah, where people contribute reports, and you can just take those and use those as little building blocks and learn quite a lot from them. And then when you get a bit further on, you can actually contribute some queries back for other people, which is good. Yeah. Yeah, me and Randy, we like that area. There's always something new and something interesting in terms of queries. Okay, we good, Teresa? Yeah. Obviously, we've got a forum in here, haven't we, in the course? So if you think of any questions later, just pop them in the forum in the course, or just, if you send me a message.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you again, Stuart. That was a great session. So yes, as Stuart says, the forum's available in the course there if you've got any questions that you think about later.
Yes, see you at the New Zealand Moodle Moot. Good stuff.